Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to this webinar. And my name is Trevor Louis, and I'm very pleased to have you joining us this evening in Hong Kong time. We have a very much rush time for the webinar because we have so much to want to share with you. May we just start now? Let me introduce the speakers. Besides myself, we have Dr. Gary Hawk, GTP President and CEO, and he's an author and also a professor in seminary. And Ernie is our GTP VP of Training and Empowerment. She's also an author and a coach. And the last one is Mr. Roger Lam. He is an international speaker and author of 2 books. And let's welcome them with a virtual pause. Okay, the flow with this webinar will be starting with myself, introducing some of the background of the topic, hope and help in times of crisis, and then followed by Dr. Gary, the biblical pathway for offering help and hope, and then Ernie about multiplying faith steward globally, by providing some of the tools and tips from GTP. And the last is the story sharing with Roger about the transformed into a generous helper. So without any delay, oh, by the way, during the webinar, you're welcome to type in any question on the chat, and we will have someone to relate the question back to us. Before we start, let's watch a video about, I interviewed some people in Hong Kong about the topic what are the hope and help during crisis timing. Okay, let's watch the video now.
My career from being employed to unemployed.
Very stressful during exams.
In times of sickness or when I witness the loss of family members, really gives me the sense of hopelessness and helplessness because one was unable to do anything to it.
Very hurtful experiences I have had in church and family. These have led me to have difficulty in trusting people.
What a beautiful name it is, and nothing compares to this.
Friend offered me a place to stay in Yangon, so I can spend quiet time to find new opportunities to move on in my new career. I offer similar help to others who are in difficult time.
Some caring senior students offered to study together and made the study more effective.
Hope in my life through the eyes of others who have received my help.
Help from family members was limitless and priceless. When there is something you really cannot cope with, help from trustworthy people can give you great relief.
Difficulties can usually be overcome by help from other people around.
Hong Kong people need to think what is meaning of their lives. If meaningful life is important to them, they will have hope. Personally, I find helping more people give me sense of meaningfulness and hope. It is a good time for people to give rather than receive. When they focus on helping others, they will see their own problems trivial. Then they may have more hope for future.
People usually hesitate to voice out when having real difficulties. Overstress is a common problem in Hong Kong, but mostly it is because people do not seek help in time. People with abilities or capacities need to be more sympathetic and proactive to offer help to people in need.
In fact, most HK people are kind but sometimes just too busy to notice people in need. People have to keep sensitive and caring to others and offer help at appropriate time.
I hope that comes from God and that God will always stay with us with everything under His control.
I hope you enjoyed the video. I think the question going the video is so fast. Maybe I could just spend a minute to go through it quickly with you. The first question we were asking them is, what kind of helplessness and hopelessness have you been experiencing personally? I don't think it's only the Hong Kong people share the concerns. It's concerned about their work, the school, the society, the health, and the trust issue. I think all around the world share the same thing. And the next question that we ask them is about the personal experiences. I think overall they share with us that family support is very important, friends, your senior student, and also sometimes strangers. One interviewee mentioned about strangers, but then you can see a little bit angel on it. Sometimes stranger can be an angel sent by God. In that case, in her specific case, the center is God is the help we come from. So that is one of the last interview we mentioned about God. And the third question is, how is your impression of hope and being changed in this experience? I heard one of the feedback is very good, is this experience turned into his purpose of life. So it leads to the last questions, what they're hoping in the future in Hong Kong. So one of them is saying that, we should give more than take. This is a whole generosity concept that we have. And also we need to go back to church and God and look for help. My next section is talking about the survey you did through the webinar registrations. So I just want to give you a quick results on the feedback. So on the left-hand side is the overall registrants response, and the right-hand side is East Asia regions. So the first, the question, I shuffled the question because I purposely doing that because I want the last question to link to my next point. This question talking about do those who are looking for hope think of looking to churches and ministry to find it? So majority, over 60% of people say, yes, I strongly agree and agree. So it's parallel with the East Asia as well, the region. The next one, the next question we ask you is any cultural value more influential than control behavior than Christian value? And the result also agree has the most people answered, and it's similar, get the response from the East Asia region. By the way, we have about 23% of participants from East Asia regions. And the last one, or the third one is, do you think people in need see churches and ministry as provider of hope and help? This give us a little bit different response in terms of strongly agree and agree. So in the East Asia region, we have more agree than strongly agree. That's something that we, in this region, we need to think about, why, we have that changes different from the overall. The last one is more interesting I want to show is, do you think practical teaching and tips would help individuals grow in their faith and generosity in church become more generous in the community? The overall is 71% strongly agree, 29% agree. But on East Asia region, it drops to 48% strongly agree and 52 agree. So this gives us a lot of opportunity in this region we can work on. By the way, this is exactly why we want to have this webinar. We would like to introduce some practical teaching and tips to you. Before we're going to hand over to Gary, I want to share one more thing that personally I think is very important, is the GTP culture we call with you culture. We are all broken. as Psalm 34:18 say, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. So we are all blessed, not because we are compete, but we are broken. I joined GTP a couple of years ago, and my personal experience is the culture with you. And in Matthew 28 is also our GTP message that we want to pass it to you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And this is how my experience with GTP, and the next one, the GTP also provide a two-dimension concept of with you. Vertically with God, horizontally with each other. During this few months, preparing these webinars, I personally experienced the horizontal and vertical with you very deeply. And two are always better than one. And may I pass the time to Dr. Gary Hawk, and he will share with you the biblical perspective of offering help and hope.
Thank you so much, Trevor. What a privilege it is to be with you from my basement office in my townhouse in Denver, Colorado. It's actually kind of cool down here. I'm excited to lean into this topic by opening the Word of God and thinking about what does it mean to offer help and hope in times of crisis. You see, I believe it starts with you and me. And when I think about those that are logged on to this webinar, you're probably a person maybe of influence. Maybe you are a pastor. Maybe you are in a small group. Or maybe you're just an ordinary follower of Jesus. And you're saying, wow, what does it mean to offer help and hope in times of crisis? So I prayed about it, and I want to offer you 3 words of wisdom today. And they really orbit around this idea of how do we develop this mindset that will shape our generosity, that will make us into these people who offer help and hope. And I want to say that we can't guide others to a place we ourselves have not been. So helping people develop this mindset starts with us. And I wish I could be with you like in Shimshashui and Kowloon, and I love my visits to Hong Kong, and someday I will return in Jesus' name. But here are some thoughts from abroad. The first one is hear and do. The Bible tells us repeatedly, not just to hear what God desires for us, but he wants us to do what he says. And that's really easier said than done when it comes to money and comes to crisis situations. So like Jesus says, give to everyone who asks of you. And we hear that and we pause. And we reason, well, I can't do that because if I do it, I'll end up empty. So what happens? We hear and we don't do. And yet if we ponder further, here's a thought that emerges, at least emerges with me. What if Jesus is trying to teach us something? You see, we can't figure it out and then live it out, because when we do, we overthink it. Obedience requires faith. And we've learned that if we hear and do, we realize Jesus' desire for us is not that we end up empty, but rather enriched. When I think of my visits to Hong Kong, I think of fun trips to the day market where I maybe had an objective. Oh, I wanted to go look for something. And maybe I got exactly what I needed. And the reality is there are people crying out right now today for something, and God has supplied that to us. And sometimes, and you've heard this, the still small voice of God whispers to us to be a conduit of blessing to that person. And here's the reality. If we do it, we receive a blessing. We are enriched. If we don't do it, what happens? We actually are the ones who miss out. We're actually the ones who missed out on the opportunity to be the conduit of blessing. We don't figure it out till we live it out, that his desire for us is to be his hands and feet. Now, the second idea I want to plant in your hearts today is learn to follow. Now, I had to give you a picture of colorful Colorado. This is a recent fly fishing trip in the Colorado Rocky Mountains with my son, Sammy. It was on July 22nd. We actually had an amazing day. We caught more fish in one day than we'd ever caught together. Why do I show you this picture? Sammy and I have done guiding in fly fishing. He had an outfitting business. We've both had the privilege of winning a number of Master Angler awards. And so we know how to fly fish. And when we guide for other people, do you know the people who catch the most fish? You know what's characteristic about them? They set aside everything they know, and with childlike faith, they follow our instructions. They catch lots of fish. And it's the same in following Jesus, in being help and hope. He wants us to set aside everything we think we know about life and follow him with childlike faith. So when he says things like, go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, if we don't hear and do, we're going to miss out. But when we do, we realize his desire is not to make us destitute. His desire is to teach us to distribute. I love this picture. This was one of the beautiful trout we caught that day in the mountains. And I love it because it's like Sammy's like handing it to you. Our extra supplies someone else's not enough. And when we learn to follow Jesus, we actually discover the joy of delivering it. Now, this is true when we spend time with Jesus in the Word. He teaches us spiritual blessings so we can what? Offer hope to someone. He blesses us materially so we can offer what? Help to others. In my country, America, and in your country, Hong Kong, there have been stimulus checks that have come to households. And one of the things we learned when we got our stimulus check was, will we join and catalyze a movement of people who will see that stimulus check as resources to share? We wrestled with this very much because we had a great need. Our car was totaled in a car accident. We needed a new car. It was like, should we share this? And so we just kept thinking, you know, God. And so what we did was we waited on God. He supplied what we needed, so then we could, by faith, use these resources to bless others. I don't know where you're at, but learning to follow is not just like something that is one time. It's like a journey. The last lesson I want to impart to you is lead the way. Back when our children were growing up, and they're out of the house now, they're married, but a wise friend said this to me. He said, Gary, your kids will do what you do, not what you say. Did you catch that? They'll do what you do, not what you say. And so we must not tell our kids what to do related to generosity and offering help and up. We must show them. We must lead the way. Now, it's really hard with passages like of Jesus, which are so radically different from the world. And so what we've learned is that leading the way means reading like the red letters, that's like the words of Jesus, and determining, even if it sounds counterintuitive and countercultural, I'm going to do it anyway. So when he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store them up in heaven, he's not trying to rob us. He's trying to help us. His gracious aim is our maturity. Because what we've learned in the process is that our hearts and affections start to follow where we put his money. Now, at this point, I want to say to you that if I stopped, maybe it would just be too theoretical. So I want to make it real in the face of the three core characters which started the Jesus movement with him, Peter, John, and James. And I want to challenge you to maybe start a movement where God has placed you in Hong Kong or wherever you're listening to this webinar. So the first one is, it's Peter. Did Peter hear and do? What did he do? He dropped the nets. Mark 1:17 says, come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And you know what the scripture says? It says, at once they left their nets and followed him immediately. Do you know what this word really implies? They did not sit around and go, I want to think about this for a little bit. They acted. Peter, hear and do. But what did he do? It says they left their nets. What was the net for fishermen? Well, this is like his livelihood. This is his source of supply. And one of the things that limits our ability to offer help and hope is we rationalize, oh, I can't help that person, because we look at our ability and our capacities instead of the God we serve, who is abundant and whose capacities are limitless. And so one of the most powerful things that happened when he left his nets, when he dropped his nets, was he was saying, no longer am I going to rely on my abilities. I'm going to depend on and trust in God's abilities. So I want to challenge you to think, what would it look like for me to drop my nets? What would it look like for me to rely on God to be the one who will resource and bless others? Now, this will require us, and I believe this is, if there's such thing as like the hardest point, this is maybe the hardest part is to abandon the culture. What do I mean by that? I don't mean be like some revolutionary. What I mean is we are bombarded with messages. So I think of, again, my wonderful visits to Hong Kong and maybe some shopping, but we can get caught up in the materialism. And if we're caught up in the materialism, God maybe blesses us with capacity, but what happens? Instead of offering help and hope, we just think life is all about us. But let's look closely at what John did. Did he learn to follow? Notice it says, when he had gone a little farther. When you hear from my friend Roger this morning, or I should say this evening, or this afternoon, depends on where you're at. But when you hear from my friend Roger, he's going to unpack that this is a journey. And so here's John on this journey. And he'd gone a little farther, and he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets without delay. So on this journey, we've got Peter's with him, and Peter's learning things, and Peter's going to end up being the rock on which Christ built the church. Here's James and John, and it says, without delay, he, that is Jesus, called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. So in the first verse, they dropped the nets. This time, they left their father in the boat and the hired men. Do you see what's happening here? In this instance, he's setting aside everything that would be what the culture says is what will give you security, what will shape your identity, what will resource your generosity. And he's following Jesus. And people are going to tell you, you need these things, materialism, or you should follow this path. And the reality is, John learned to follow. Jesus is on the journey. Peter's with him. And now John follows. So they're leaving what we would say is their livelihood. They're leaving behind the cultural influences, which, as the research showed, the culture influences us. And one of the things you're going to hear from Irene shortly is that when we step up and we maybe follow Jesus on this journey, we can actually have great influence in the lives of others. And this is happening all over the world. The third example of when I think of the disciples is the idea of engaging the receptive. So like, did James lead the way? Because I challenge you to hear and do, to learn to follow, to lead the way. Did they do this? Yes. Like in the opening, unfolding stages of when help and hope came to the world, as soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon. So now James has taken the lead. He is one who hears this invitation to be a conduit of blessing and says, hey, let's go. Let's do this. And I want to challenge you to think about the fact that engaging the receptive is maybe not the most educated people. It's maybe not the most influential people, but it's people who are interested and willing to follow Jesus wherever he may lead. Now, if I were to summarize my remarks, I would do it because I want to challenge you to find yourself in the story right now, wherever you are. You see, you and I can offer help and hope in times of crisis if we listen keenly to Jesus and hear what he says and resolve to do it. And this may mean to drop the nets. So again, I challenge you to ask yourself, what does it mean for me to drop the nets? What would that look like in my context? Maybe I'm a pastor. Maybe I'm a a businessman. Maybe I'm a small group leader. What is Jesus asking me to do? How might he build a movement on me if I'm willing to let go of what I think I'm here to accomplish? And then learn to follow. And this learning is learning the way of Jesus, which is very different from the way of the culture. And so this is more of a process. And maybe in the discussion at the end, I'll make some suggestions on how to retrain your mind in the following journey. But lastly, lead the way. And this means don't go at it alone, engage others. And that's really a perfect transition for my colleague Rainey Monir to share what God is doing around the world. You see, we're just endeavoring to be these faithful stewards, and what GTP is doing is multiplying faithful stewards all over the world. Rainey?
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for letting us understand the biblical pathway through like bringing the peace and hope for everyone, to bring the help for the faithful stewards to make a disciples. And now, after understanding hear and do, how to learn to follow and lead the way, we want to engage with you with our story as a GTP and letting you be engaged in what is happening across the world, what is happening from people's story. Thankfully, it's not only about Peter and James and John, which happened many years ago. Today, we have many stories. And through that, I get to share with you how GTP are multiplying faithful stewards. Our purpose in obedient service to Jesus Christ, Jesus GTP multiplies faithful stewards and mobilize peer accountability groups to build trust and grow local generous giving to God's work. So through that, we introduce 4 programs. What is our programs? It's including in teaching and training and teamwork and toolbox. Through these programs, we are meeting amazing people. And through these meetings, there is a 3 common characteristics we found that is very consistent that the stewards we work with they have. They are not extraordinary people. We are searching for the people that they are unusual and extraordinary. They are very ordinary people. But what is the characteristics in their life? They are available people and they are taking the action. When they are available to God, available to everyone, available to learn and lead the way, they take the action and that change the situation. They change the situation of their ministries, of their country, of their cultures. Actually, to navigate rightly through the crisis, to bring hope and peace. So let me give you an 8 examples of those people. It might be some examples of like the people that we met across the world, which illustrate how we can help you in East Asia and Hong Kong, how we are praying to make your stories to impact the culture. It starts with the first one, the teaching. We met Dawood. He was in Jordan. He's journalist. But when we met him, he felt that he can be an agent of transforming governance. At that time, the king of Jordan, he was actually asking the 5 dominations of the church to let them correct the situation, put their house in order. They send an instruction for everyone in the churches. And Dawood felt, okay, I'm going to call GTP and people to help us. As you know, GTP are providing integrated biblical teaching in the faithful administration, in the fundraising, and in the governance. So they asked us to introduce a governance training and teaching with some templates helping them how to make a right governance, how to make a right people to serve in your governance. This was an example that when you face a problem in your culture, You call people to ask, and then you navigate it rightly through the teaching and practical tips. What happened in Egypt? We gathered the small ministries, not like a famous ministries, not a big ministries. We called some people, ordinary people, come and gather in a retreat for 3 days and have a group in Sharm Sheikh. It's a country, it's a sorry, a city in Egypt. Have a time for sharing and listening to their challenges and how to navigate it rightly and have a growing local giving together. The surprise is it was not just about how to make money and make our ministry flourish. They know the key. The key is making a right networking to bring people into your organization. And what happened there? That they didn't finish and then go and find the people. They found the right people, as you see in the picture, from all of us. They decided to make a WhatsApp group and a group to sustain each other, to work and pray to each other. Even there was like some crisis in some ministries, they decided to help each other to grow. And this is what we are praying that you can do, even for small ministries. You can do it, but if you have the right people. Let's go for the next program, which is the training. We do replicable training and responsive training. For the replicable training, there's one of the training called Journey of Empowerment. And through that, we help people to understand their identity and how they can work in a community all together. We did that in many countries. And one of the countries that was in Guatemala, we met amazing people like Gladys and Karim. They are CEOs of their ministries. But when they hear that, Gladys decided, I want to train this training for the next generation, helping them to understand their identity and change the situation to let people make a difference. Karine has autistic kids, and she decided to help and gather and call the other parents who has an autistic kids to train them for the same journey of empowerment. After getting the training of trainers, she get that and she went with these parents to help them to understand who they are and how to make a difference. The second option, the second for the responsive training, as we were sharing with you, what we mean by responsive training. Responsive training is to hear from the countries what they need. Different demands coming from people across the world. What we heard from Africa, from Winnie and Lucy in Kenya, Jonathan in Nigeria, Prosper in Togo, Ayusana from Cote d'Ivoire. They called us and they said, we need help during the COVID crisis. We have a problems in the ministries and we need your help. What we did, we just didn't give them a training that we have. We build it with them. We ask them, what do you need? And give them a list and they choose what they need. What they need is helping people go from surviving to thriving by living out our true identity as stewards. When we help people to understand that, they make a difference. Many people from Africa, they understood how how they can use what they have in their boxes rather than what they don't have in the crisis. Just remember that if you understand your identity, you will understand that you have a lot in your boxes. You can use what you have rather than just keep weeping and say that I don't have anything. The third point is related to teamwork. What we mean by teamwork. We are working with an amazing 12 regional facilitators across the world. And through that, we are hearing the world problems. So if we go and serve this region, we want to hear from them. And we met one of the amazing people, Ruben and Joanne. Ruben was from Pakistan and Joanne was from India. They were like ones of the hundreds who attended one of our webinars. It was talking about guiding churches and schools in crisis. And they heard the teaching, but actually, they changed their situation. The teaching was about how to assess your situation in the crisis, then how to act with courage, how to put what you have with God to change the situation, and how to pray for the daylight. After you do what you do, how to pray for the daylight, to let God control the things that you can't control. After meeting them and get the teaching, what happened to Robin? In Pakistan, he's a pastor in a church. And he shared his impact stories. And actually, you will find his impact stories in our website. He decided not to just stay and wait for the churches to be open after the COVID-19. He called other pastors and he went to the street serving the starving in the cities, helping them. And this is shape the future for the church. Church is not about the building, church about people. So he went and helped them from their heart. He assessed the situation and bring what he has to change the situation and pray for the daylight. What happened to Joanne? She was facing a financial crisis in her ministry, as you might face in these days. What she did after hearing that, after hearing what Nehemiah did and Ezra, when they confess and pray for a daylight and gather their people, she went and gathered her people, her board members, her people who are like ministering with her, and asked them, let's pray and fast and see what's happening. And from there, God navigated their crisis. They had many things into their table after they discussed and prayed and put scriptures in the beginning. There's more stories you can read in our website. Let me share with you the second point. Sorry, for like the second point, the teamwork. It's related to people in Indonesia. Tony and Surya and Manish and Hondoko. In Indonesia, when they heard that teaching about how to make the peer accountability movement. You might hear this word from our teaching in like other webinars. What we mean by peer accountability movement, that GTP helped to multiply faithful stewards, to gather and let people to follow standards in each region. And by these standards, to make a right administrative, faithful administrative in the governance, in the fundraising, how to make a right board, many different standards to follow, and to let people get accreditation on annual basis. By this time, you are enhancing trust and you make a right building capacity and get more local giving. By this time, we are helping them, and we built like we helped people to build 8 peer accountability movement across the world. So when they are here in Indonesia, we are celebrating with them. They just, during the COVID, as you see from their picture, they put the masks, but they even established the peer accountability movement to help ministries flourish and have this sustainability. The last point is related to our toolbox. What we mean by toolbox. You might hear many foreigner teaching or like other amazing teaching. But what happened? In Egypt, we have an amazing teachers came and gave us amazing teaching, and we are so blessed. But then they left us handicapped. So in GTP, we want to resource and help you, empower you from your point, not our point. Kuya Inji in Philippines, when he see this toolbox, the diagnostic tool, he said that I did the free diagnostic tool. The templates will help us put our ministry house in order. This diagnostic tool asking you for like 36 questions. And by answering yes or no, you know where is your ministry stand for? How is your board? How is your people? How are you hiring people? And answering yes or no, you will have a free template to help you to assess the situation again and take an action. Be available and take an action and do the right action from God. There is hundreds of stories globally, and you might be one of them. Getting the resources at www.gtp.org. Assess your situation and make it happen. And we want to be actually with you. I want to finish with the three questions which we started with. Are you available? As Gary said, hear and do. How is your availability today after hearing that? Christ is with you. But are you available? Like Gladys and Joanne and many people from Africa decided, Jonathan and Nusa decided that they are gonna come and ask their people to listen and change the situation. Will you take action regardless of what others are doing? As Gary was just sharing, culture impacting us, people around us in a secular base, in the professional careers, trying to push us in a different way into the common path, not like just asking God for like following the common path. God is asking us to follow the kingdom path today. GTP is with you, and we want to help you through time. What is about will you change the situation today and bring hope and help in crisis? The decision is up to you, and we want to be with you. Now, we want to go to the last part, but the best one of like who is Roger Lamb. He's a writer of Lost and Found book, which is talking about money versus riches. And he will speak about transformed into a generous help. Let's start.
Thank you, Ernie. That's such a generous introduction from you. Well, first of all, I want to praise the Lord for connecting me with Gary and with the rest of the GTP team and enabling me to have this opportunity this evening in Hong Kong to serve in this capacity to share with you all my story. It's really a talking about my journey from how I was a serious slave to money, and how God gradually gave me mastery to gain over that. Now, loosely speaking, God put me on a complete roller coaster in my life, and it started with, and it can be broken down into three stages. The first stage was when I was very young. I depended, my confidence was on my family business. And then when that failed, I depended on myself. And when that failed, then, slowly God wrestled the control from my own hands. And then I learned to depend on God. And once I started to learn to depend on Him, then He taught me a lot more about stewardship and generosity. So let me just walk you through very quickly about my journey. So I'll start with stage one. I'm a fourth generation Christian, and I was in banking for 25 years. The story kind of started with my grandfather. He's a very good man. He was a very successful businessman. He started a very famous paint company in Hong Kong in the 1930s. At the same time, he helped to co-found a church in Hong Kong. Now, my grandfather was possibly an overly generous man. By the time that he passed away, my dad was running the business for him, but he only gave 10% of the shares of the company to my dad. I was very proud of the family brand. I was basically daydreaming that, one day, I would, take over control of the company. I will work there, and everything is all set. And this was generally true until I was 13 years old. My granduncle and his sons collectively owned more shares than my dad. And in 1985, they pulled in an outside business person to come into the situation and launch a hostile takeover on our family business. My dad fought them valiantly for about a year, and then he narrowly lost out. So at the age of 14, I was painfully aware that I had lost my birthright. I no longer have succession rights on the family business. I can no longer depend not only on the family business, but I can no longer depend on my parents either, really, because they don't have a new source of income. And I was a pretty nosy teenager. I went through all the documents, on the takeover and stuff. So down to the last penny that my dad got for tendering his shares, I was also aware how much cash he had in the bank account. He decided that he didn't want to stick around in Hong Kong because he felt there was nothing left for him to do. So he moved our family of 4 to Vancouver, Canada. Once we got there, I figured out that I could no longer depend on the family business or my parents anymore. I've got to figure out a way to bust out of the situation. So I decided that I had to depend on myself, because quite frankly, at that point, even though I had gone to Sunday school all my life, I had not built a personal relationship with Jesus. And I wasn't gifted, particularly in sports or music, at least not so much that I could, make money really quickly in either of those areas. So I decided that I have to excel in academics, and I kind of like had a 180-degree turn in my personality. I used to be a very, happy kind of like child. And then once I got to Vancouver, I just decided that I have to, lean on myself. So everything became fueled by fear and anger. It's a little bit like, how Anakin Skywalker turned to the dark side. And I viewed that all my peers in the new environment, they were all kind of like my enemies. And basically I had to, crush them with test scores and with grades. And that was my only way out to one day possibly have a chance of revenge and to make a name for myself and to make a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of negative energy succeeded in a way. It helped me get really good grades, and from a regular, run-of-the-mill public school in Vancouver, it got me into a very good university in upstate New York. And I kind of brought the same, bad attitude, modus operandi with me to college. And, again, it served me well in a sense that it helped me to get really good grades. I graduated Phi Beta Kappa. And, but by the time it was second semester of senior year, when I was looking for jobs, I hit a serious road bump because, when you apply for a job, it's not just your GPA that will get you an offer. I got through to the final round interview of many, large corporations, banks, and consulting companies. But I think employers generally are pretty smart. I think they all sense that there's something wrong with this kid. He's not going to fit into any of our training programs. There's something really off about him. So basically, I got dinged by 49 out of 50 jobs. And then the only job that I applied to outside of Hong Kong or New York was at this small little shop in Chicago. I didn't really know what a trader does. I definitely didn't know much about convertible bonds or equity derivatives, and I certainly had never heard of a hedge fund before. But somehow, even though I didn't have a personal relationship with God, He had never left me or forsaken me, and He placed me at the pinnacle of the finance industry for a fresh undergraduate to enter into. Looking back at the first 10 years of my career, it was relatively smooth sailing. All I cared about was making money as quickly as possible, and by getting promoted as quickly as possible. I had very little other cares. I didn't really care about the feelings of my colleagues around me, and so that was kind of like what made it, I guess, smooth sailing in a way because I just didn't have a lot of other cares. By the year 2002, I had already moved back to Hong Kong, and I followed my parents to Community Church Hong Kong, where I still worship today. There, I ran into an ex-colleague from the mid-90s at a Swiss investment bank. Now, this lady is really interesting. Every time I see her, this is the first thing that will fly out of her mouth. Will you come to my Bible study? Now, quite frankly, at that point, I was not ready for a small group community, focusing on studying the Bible. So I kept making up excuses saying, oh, next week I'm traveling, oh, I'm busy, or, or whatever. And this lasted for about a year. And then the following year, which was in 2003, when SARS hit Hong Kong really badly, within a 24-hour period, I experienced two severe personal tragedies. One was in my work life, and then the other was in my personal relationship. As a 14-year-old, I felt worse than when I was a 14-year-old when I lost the family business, probably because, as a child, I was just an innocent bystander. There was nothing I could have done about it. But, during my phase of self-dependence, quote unquote, I had achieved some success. And by relying on my own devices, I actually got somewhere. So that hurt all the more. So that Sunday, I went to church, and guess who I bumped into? That same ex-colleague from the mid-90s. And what's the first thing that she said that flew out of her mouth? Will you come to my Bible study? At that point, I was just thinking, Roger, you're down in the pits already. What else have you got to lose? They're not going to bite you at the Bible study. So I think to her surprise and to my surprise, I said to her, when is it? Where is it? I'll be there. And this turned out to be, one of the biggest turning points in my life as I started to learn to depend on God. Two really big departures from my previous narcissistic existence. Number one, at the life group, at the small group, I actually had to pay a lot of attention to hearing other people's problems. This is a really sharp departure from my previous narcissistic existence when I spent 100% of my mental capacity and my ability on thinking how to optimize my own benefits. And then the other big departure for me was participating in outreach. I still remember very vividly in 2004, the small group organized an outreach visit, which I participated for the first time in my life. This elderly gentleman just got discharged from a hospice, which meant that his health is not exactly in great shape. He lived by himself. He had no family members to take care of him, and he lived in a very small unit, and it was, I dare say, it was not very hygienic. I went there. I brought with me a small little care bag with some goodies in there, and all I did was sit in his flat and chat with him for like 10-15 minutes, have a cup of tea with him, and made him so happy. And that started to change my definition of success. It's no longer just about making money. It's no longer just about getting promoted, but the fact that, wow, I can actually make someone happy. And that actually brought me a lot of joy. Now, I probably spent the following year or two really learn to love God, love others, spend a lot of time serving a church, other ministries, and serving the community. But my greatest hurt remained in the area of the lack of security over money and provision, probably from my childhood financial trauma. God is so amazingly faithful. He was willing to spend 10 years to teach me one Bible verse. I must be a really slow student. And that was his plan. That was his healing plan for me. No medication involved, but it was through this one Bible verse. And it's on the screen, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. In money terms, God taught me what he required of me, and that is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. I'm going to speed up a little bit and walk you through this three-part journey. In 2005, for the first time in my life, I heard my full-length sermon on tithing. And my pastor at the time, he quoted Malachi 3:10, which is a classic stewardship verse. And what really caught my attention was the fact that my pastor mentioned that this is the only area in the whole Bible that God allows you to test him in. Anywhere else in the Bible, you see people testing God, something really bad happens, either to that person individually or to his community or to his country. So I thought, well, this is on a genuine, unique opportunity where I'm allowed to test God in. So after I heard the sermon, I made a very counterintuitive, countercultural, and uneducated decision to follow God's word in the area of money and possessions as the first area in the whole Bible where I would actually diligently follow biblical teaching to live my life. So the testing I did was I went really slowly in getting from 0 to 10% of my pre-tax gross income. So right after the sermon, I filled out an auto pay form and I put down 1% of my base salary to tithe to give to church that month. You know, obviously it didn't hurt. So the next month I moved it up to 2%, and that month went by, didn't feel anything. So I thought, well, if I keep just incrementally adding 1%, it will take forever. So okay, let's accelerate a little bit. So the third month I upped it to 5%, and still, you know, I was in 2005. I was single. I was living with my parents, and investment banking compensation back then was still very good, so it didn't hurt. So by the fourth month, I changed it to 10%, and that month went by, and then spiritual pride started to creep in. I tapped myself on the shoulder, thinking that now you're following God's teaching in the area of money and possessions. You're a good steward now. Every time I have this kind of like foolish spiritual pride, God then shows me the next leg of the homework. A few months later, it was year end and it was bonus time. When I got my bonus number, I was like, do I need to tithe on this as well? It was complicated, not just from a quantitative standpoint, but also on the composition of the bonus. The cash portion is easy because once that's given to me, then I could do whatever I want with it. But the stock portion, you know, most of the stock I wouldn't receive for 1, 2, or 3 years. So the first bonus check, I had some muddled prosperity gospel thinking, and then I basically what I did was, okay, Lord, I will pre-tithe on the stock portion, which I haven't received yet. Now, I'm not being greedy. I'm not asking you to send my company shares, you know, through the roof. But, you know, given that I've pre-tithed on it, you know, would you at least put a floor of downside protection on the share price? Very shortly, I realized that God doesn't get bribed like this. The share price, you know, tanked, and then I thought, you know, this is not the way to go. So by the second bonus season, I learned to tithe properly, and that is I would tithe the cash portion first, and whenever I received the stock through vesting, I would then measure the value equivalent, and then I would tithe at that point. and and do away with any kind of like crazy prosperity gospel thinking. Now, in Malachi and Micah 6:8, pardon me, the first part is acting justly. So how does tithing fit into the schematic of acting justly? In Malachi 3:8, God was livid. He said, "You're robbing me." And then lowly man says, "Well, you're God. How can I rob you?" And then God says, "By not tithing, you are robbing me." So I justified that the bare minimum 101 level of acting justly in the area of money is to tithe in full. I was filled with spiritual pride after discovering that I was possibly tithing the most in my church. And then God shows me the next leg of the homework, because every time I have spiritual pride, he then humbles me. In '07, my pastor said to me one Sunday, "There's a brother at church. He's got some money problems. Will you please meet with us to see what you can do?" This brother turned out that he borrowed some money from a loan shark. He actually borrowed around 3 years worth of his wages from a loan shark. And he claimed that within 72 hours, if he didn't repay in full, then the loan shark would threaten to hurt him physically. So I thought, well, I have the means to help him. And clearly, God brought me to this opportunity to help out someone within the body of Christ. And my senior pastor is here as my witness. So I just asked him 3 due diligence questions. I said, "The money that you borrowed, is it for drugs?" He said, "No." I said, "The money that you borrowed, is it for gambling?" He said, "No." I said, the amount of money that you're asking for now, is this the full amount that will bail you out?" He said, "Yes." Now, I was super naive. I did not even think for a moment that he would default on my loan to him. Probably because this was done at church, it was done in front of my pastor, and clearly God brought me to this opportunity. So and at that point, I didn't know the Old Testament all that well, but the terms that I structured with him, a Levitical priest would have gone check on all the terms. So I told him I would lend you the money in full. I would charge you no interest, and then let's just arbitrarily say that we're going to stretch this out by 5 years. And so I asked him point blank, "The amount that I lend you, divide that by 60 on a monthly basis. Is that a comfortable amount for you to repay me?" And he said, "Yes." "That's very generous of you. Thank you so much." In the interest of time, I will skip to the 24th month, when the payment all of a sudden stopped completely. The most bizarre decision this individual made was the fact that he kept coming to my church. So every Sunday I would see him, and sometimes I'll admit that I would be angry. And then that was the real homework that God assigned me. Am I allowed to be angry? Am I allowed to sit him down and ask him what's going on with the repayment? And if I do sit him down, with what attitude am I allowed to speak to him in? And then as I became more and more familiar with the Bible, then the parable of the unmerciful servant in Matthew 18 really spoke strongly to me. In a nutshell, if I choose to be nasty to this brother, then basically I would be inviting Jesus Christ to be nasty to me. Now, I thought that's not very clever. So I just decided, you definitely cannot give him dirty looks. You cannot badmouth him. You cannot, say nasty things to him. So I just decided, okay, let's just, ride it out and see what happens. And it was, and then years went by, until one day, I still remember very clearly exactly which spot I was standing at church. And then I heard an audible voice from God in the form of a question for the first time in my life. The Holy Spirit asked me, "When did you lend money to this brother?" I actually took took it very seriously. I whipped out my BlackBerry at the time, and then I went through the calendar because I marked it down when I lent the money. And it took me basically like half a minute to answer the question. And I replied to the Lord. I said, that was in 2007. Now, that day was in the year 2014. At that point, I became much more familiar with the Old Testament of the Bible as well. So immediately, I knew why God chose to speak to me for the first time audibly. The seventh year is the year of debt forgiveness. So essentially, God was asking me, are you serious about following biblical teaching about money and possessions? And if so, are you willing to forgive this brother's debt, given that it's the year of debt forgiveness now? Now, immediately, the first thought that came to my mind was, if the maker of heaven and earth chooses to speak to me directly for the first time, and if I don't respond favorably to him, that's basically not showing him any face, right? Not giving him any face. Now, that's not very clever. So I decided right there on the spot. I walked up to the brother and I said, your debt is forgiven. Let's rip up the ticket. You don't owe me anything anymore. I'm pleased to report that to this day, we are very good friends. He's still at my church, and he has blessed me and my family in a lot of different ways. This 7-year journey, I think, loosely fits into the schematic of the middle portion of Micah 6:8, of learning to love mercy in the area of money. As you can imagine, I was once again filled with spiritual pride after nailing those 2 lessons. And then God teaches me the toughest lesson, which is the last part of Micah 6:8. He taught me why and how to be humble in walking with him. In December 2014, I started to suffer from panic disorder or anxiety attacks. The reason was money. So immediately I knew, Roger, you hadn't arrived yet as a steward, because if you had, money should not be bothering you so much to give you panic disorder. Now, why was money such a big issue? Ever since that I started tithing in full from 2007, my income trajectory just went lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. So much for prosperity gospel. It didn't work for me, at least. But then there were some expenses that I was unwilling to adjust downwards in proportion with my income. For instance, my monthly support for my parents, and also monthly support for my grandmother. And then in 2009, Sylvia and I got married. In 2010, we bought our apartment. In 2011, Danielle was born, and then 2014, Enoch was born. So basically, our expenses just kept going up and up and up and up. So starting in January 2014, I had more expenses than I had income. So I had negative cash flow starting from January. And by the time it was Christmas break in 2014, I was basically staring at this negative cash flow of a hole. And I'm pretty sure that's what triggered me into having panic disorder. So I prayed. I said, Lord, please help me out. Please give me a bonus. I'm not being greedy, but please give me a bonus such that on an after-tax basis, it would be enough to cover my expenses for 2014. And God is faithful. Beginning of 2015, he gave me exactly that amount of a bonus. But then I prayed, Lord, is this how you kind of want me to live, for the rest of my life? It kind of sucks. I don't really enjoy this. It's not very fun to be in the red and then beg you for a bonus just to go flat for the year. Right around the same time, my pastor asked me to go and find a course, a Christian course in finances, because he said he didn't teach enough about stewardship and generosity behind the pulpit. So I found the Crown Financial Ministry course, and then the first verse at the first lesson that the guest lecturer um, 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 taught. Actually, the first guest lecturer was Jeff Ryan. He may or may not be on the webinar. Was Psalms 24 verse 1. And once I heard that, it was like a pin drop. I knew exactly what I had been doing wrong all my life about money. Psalms 24:1 basically says, the whole earth and everything and everyone in it belongs to the Lord. So what had been doing wrong is that I was on a revenue split model with God. The $100 of income comes in, the first 10 is yours, Lord, and then the other 90 is mine. How I save it, spend it, plan for the future, invest it, that's my business. Thank you very much. And with this kind of spiritual stance, basically, I'm saying to God, I can make it on my own. I don't need you to take care of me. I don't need you to provide for me. Now, this is definitely the dumbest thing that anyone can do, because throughout the Bible, God talks about we just have to trust and obey in him, and then he will provide for us. We were never designed to strap on this excruciating amount of burden and responsibility on ourselves. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we can just sit on our couches, watch Netflix, and then money will fall from the sky. That's definitely not what I'm saying. Work has a purpose, but it's not necessarily to provide for us, because the ultimate provider is God. God is Jehovah Jireh. He is the God who provides. Work has a meaning to basically to train our characters. And also workplace is possibly the greatest mission field, because that's where pastors and ministry workers, they cannot reach. What I also learned was Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18, and that is even our ability to make money comes from God. Because imagine that if God took away a single heartbeat, a single breath, if he took away your intellect, your education, your a stable economic platform for you to thrive in, there would be no chance for any of us to own anything. So our KPI from God, I realized, is not how much money we make. It's not whether we're a chairman of a listed company. It's not whether we're chairman of the board. It's not whether we make managing director. What he really cares about is, do you acknowledge that, first and foremost, are you a dearly loved child of God, that he sent his one and only son to die for, just for your redemption? Number two, he cares about whether you acknowledge that everything that you have, it comes from him. Because empty-handed we came, and one day empty-handed we'll leave. And if we acknowledge that we received everything with open hands, then are we willing to share these resources freely with his other children, whom Jesus also died for, but they may at the moment be a little bit less advantageous than you are. They may have a little bit less ability to help themselves at this moment. Are you willing to use the resources that you freely received to freely help them? If you are, then I must congratulate you, because you will be rich, you will be deemed rich towards God. And that is going to be the most important thing ever. I'm in the interest of time, I've already overrun my 25 minutes. I'm not going to talk about Micah 6:8, how I recognize that pattern. It was only in hindsight. I'll tell you that for sure. If you're interested, you can check out my book. But I do want to I want to close with this. When Trevor asked me to do up some slides for this sharing, Galatians 6:10 really spoke to me as possibly being my key verse in terms of thinking about being hope and help in times of crisis. And let's read it. Galatians 6:10 says, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers." I pray that you will be richly blessed so that you can be a blessing to many others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger, Ernie, and Gary. I think the powerful story you heard from Roger make you have so many questions. I was busy because we have 11 questions and we only have 4 minutes left. So the only thing I can do is to select some of the questions to some of the speakers, but you can stay tuned. After the webinars, we will try to see how we can answer your questions. So because of the time, I asked the first question to Gary. Okay. Give everything must be explained and demonstrated in practical item, not just quoting the Bible. The message can be designated to be understood ordinary paycheck to paycheck person. This is first question for you, Gary.
Sure. Well, I want to say that the challenge to follow Jesus with relationship to money and offering hope and help has different things working against it based on our cultural settings. And so maybe the challenge in my setting in America is thinking life consists in the abundance of possessions. And so the idea of giving everything is giving up the willingness to buy all these things to maybe store them up in heaven instead. Or maybe for my East Asian brothers and sisters, I have learned from one of my longest friends is that maybe the temptation instead of materialism is like hoarding for security. And so here's my answer. As a biblical scholar, super quick, my answer is after Jesus' whole earthly ministry, before he goes to the cross, the secret to answering this question about what it means to give everything is found in the parable of the minas. You say, what is the parable of the minas? A mina is 3 months income. And so all a steward needs to be fruitful in their operating capital is 3 months income. You can pay your credit card bills, and so we function, and I have functioned on a mina. And for me, if I were to share my story like Trevor or like Roger did, for me, it was when I was working on the Stewardship Study Bible, and I was realizing that I was ignoring Jesus' teachings and following cultural narratives instead. And when we instead of trying to secure our future by amassing great wealth, when we stored it up in heaven with the exception of a mina, that's when life began for us. And so I would charge you that the first steps is really assessing what you have and where your security is placed. And I might encourage you to check out the devotional books and read them with a friend, because this is not a journey to go out alone. The devotional books on the GTP resource page, Thrive and Steward, and they will help you on this journey. But that's my answer. Giving everything is really choosing to live simply and then put your trust in God to sustain you.
Okay, well, last 1 minute for Roger. When we talk about hearing from God, what is the best way in which you would do so?
That's a great question, Trevor. Also a difficult one to answer categorically. But I would say that I believe when you genuinely demonstrate eagerness and willingness to be God's friend by having a regular dialogue, by basically reading the word every day and praying and so on and so forth. But it's not about religiosity. I think the key thing in demonstrating true friendship towards God is by obeying his word, because in John, Jesus said, if you love me, basically do what I say. I think when we show a commitment to doing that, and obviously we will fail time and again, but the grace of God will cover us for that. But I think if we genuinely demonstrate that and we genuinely wish to follow God by obeying His words, I think God will reach out to us and basically communicate with us. Thank you.
Yeah, I always ask Roger this question too, right, Roger? The last question, Rene, I give you the toughest question to ask you before we close this webinar. Does GTP offer courses for people who desire accreditation in church accountability?
Yes, we are if you visit the resources section in www.gtp.com, you will find that many webinars can help you to understand more content about each section. But also, if you are care more about that, how to have the peer accountability movement, there is a resources, a template called How You Start the Peer Accountability Movement. It's with 10 points with just one template. So it will help you to start to understand the keys. Another thing, we are mapped in the GTP website, the 12 region, which with the content and the contact information of each regional facilitator. So if you are from Philippines and this region, you will you will see there's the Philippine regional facilitator. You're gonna start to write down what you need and how you want to have the peer accountability in your region, and send it in our website to direct you to the regional facilitator. Have his email him, and then we can just arrange about the needs and the demand for our event. This is always what's happening. We can go for anywhere. Actually, last year before the COVID, we went to New Zealand. We went to many different, Egypt, Jordan, different region that many people can't reach, but we would love to help. But it's not depending on us, it's depend on God's stewards. So we want to turn any dependency into an independency to flourish the ministry. So you can go to the resources, start to download the templates, understand how to make the peer accountability group, and connect with your regional facilitator through our website.
Thank you very much. We are overrun 2 minutes. I'm officially closing the webinar at the moment, but we have still 8 questions outstanding. Let us figure out how to do this, this 8 question, maybe another webinar, or, we can post it onto the website. But stay tuned, we will let you know. Anything else for others?
How about we do this? How about we sign off for now, and then those who are still logged on, we can have an unplugged conversation with them. On behalf of GTP, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we pray that the seeds we planted in you will take root and bear fruit, and that you, wherever you are, whether in Hong Kong, East Asia, or around the world, will offer hope and help in times of crisis.